It was the most beloved possession of his best friend. So Henry VIII took it for himself. He made it a honeymoon palace for his wives and a house of horrors when he tired of them. Through treachery and tragedy, he bequeathed the kings and queens of England a magnificent and tempestuous legacy, Hampton Court Palace. Hampton Court, England, 1525. The king is coming. In the palace kitchens, like something out of Dante's hell, cooks feverishly prepare a sumptuous banquet for this grandest of guests. Henry VIII's prodigious appetites are well known here. He has been a frequent guest. The lord of the manor, Thomas Cardinal Wolsey, has been Henry's closest advisor and friend for years. But change is in the wind. The king is coming, and the chief of the household makes sure everything is perfect. These days, feeding England's two most powerful men is not for the faint of heart. The king is coming, and at last Wolsey's beloved palace stands ready to receive him. Once upon a time, the cardinal liked nothing better than to indulge his monarch in grand style, but now the host fears his guest. In the solitude of his study, the Wolsey closet, the cardinal ponders his dilemma. Queen Catherine has produced no male heir. Henry's mistress, Anne Boleyn, wants Catherine's crown. Henry wants his marriage annulled. The Pope wants no part of it, and everyone wants Wolsey to fix everything. The cardinal is caught between two masters, His Holiness the Pope and his friend the King. But friends of Henry VIII have been known to lose their heads. Wolsey fears his time has come. Unbeknownst to Wolsey, Henry will let him keep his head for the moment. The king is after something nearly as dear to the cardinal. When he began construction on Hampton Court in 1515, Thomas Cardinal Wolsey had come a long way from his origins as the son of a butcher. Henry VIII had given Wolsey free rein to pursue his two passions, power and architecture. In all but title, Wolsey had been a king. Now he would build himself a palace fit for one. Wolsey chose a spot on the Thames some 10 miles upstream from the dreaded stink and disease of London. Not exactly a man of the people, Wolsey was known to press an orange rind stuffed with spices to his nose so as not to smell the vulgar crowd. He designed Hampton Court Palace around 3 consecutive courts built to house his many honoured guests. its expansive layout made for sunny rooms with impressive views for all. With the rich coffers of the church at his disposal, the cardinal could afford to indulge any architectural fancy. For base court, Wolsey hired an Italian sculptor to fashion 8 terracotta medallions of the Roman emperors. Adorning the inner court, Wolsey's coat of arms, angels, and a cardinal's hat. Inside as out, the cardinal spared no expense, especially when entertaining heads of state like Henry. Meals included delicacies like peacock, plucked, baked, then re-feathered. As a final flourish, the beak would be dipped in gold. Pastry chefs outdid themselves to please the cardinal with architectural confections. Astounded guests reported a cake in the shape of a fortress, and pastries modelled after old St. Paul's Cathedral. But Wolsey overreached. The king had once admired his appetite for fine living. Now, Henry was beginning to wonder why the butcher's son lived higher than the king himself. Henry wasn't the only one. The poet John Skelton wrote, "The king's court should have the excellence, but Hampton Court hath the pre-eminence." According to tradition, in Hampton's garden one evening after dinner, Henry cruelly asked, "What moves a cardinal to build a palace fit for a king?" Wolsey hastily replied, "To show how great a gift he can offer his monarch." Henry greedily snapped it up. It was the most lavish and desperate gift any subject ever offered his ruler. Henry allowed Wolsey to remain at Hampton Court for 3 years, as a tenant. But his vivacious young mistress, Anne Boleyn, hated the cardinal. In 1529, frustrated by Wolsey's failure to get an annulment from the Pope, Henry stripped Wolsey of his offices and ordered him out of the palace. Within a year, Wolsey was dead. As he headed for the dread Tower of London, illness saved him from the executioner's blade. By then, Henry had already installed Anne Boleyn in Hampton Court. He would marry her and make it their honeymoon palace. But he could not know how many honeymoons there would be, and how many would end in tragedy. Henry VIII quickly set about making Hampton Court his own. Henry's Tudor beasts and coat of arms went up, and Wolsey's came down. Henry VIII would ultimately own more than 60 houses, castles and palaces, but Hampton Court was one of the few that could accommodate his entire retinue of over 1,000 nobles and servants. To feed them in one place, Henry wanted a great hall, one that would put Wolsey's to shame, and he wanted it in a hurry. Masons and carpenters working by candlelight completed the hall in just 3 years. Banqueters feasting beneath the magnificent carved oak roof would sometimes be treated to Henry's own compositions from the musicians' gallery. According to tradition, it was Henry VIII who penned the ballad Greensleeves. Feeding the enormous court kept some 200 servants busy. Fresh food arrived by the cartload. Above the service gateway were the offices of the kitchen accountants, the clerks of the green cloth. From here they could make sure that the goods entering the palace reached their intended pantries. Meat made up an artery clogging 3/4 of what the Tudor court ate. And the court ate a lot. In a single year, 53 wild boar, 1,200 oxen, 8,000 sheep, 800 calves, 1,800 pigs and 2,000 deer. To Cardinal Wolsey's enormous kitchen, Henry added another even larger, and many subsidiary kitchens. In them, dozens of cooks laboured under a master cook. Meanwhile, a small army of servants hauled the food upstairs to the great hall in relays. Throughout the meal, the servants made many a trip to the wine cellar. In 1 year, the Tudor court would drink its way through almost 10,000 gallons of wine and 600,000 gallons of ale. After the banquets, Anne loved to stage elaborate pageants and plays. She soon starred in her own tragedy. She had failed to give Henry a male heir to the throne. After several miscarriages, Anne found herself in the Tower of London on charges of infidelity. It is said that on the day the executioner's sword fell on her delicate neck, Henry wined and dined her replacement, a young lady-in-waiting named Jane Seymour. To them at last a child was born. With great celebration, a boy named Edward was baptized in Henry's magnificent chapel. Yet Jane Seymour succumbed to complications of childbirth. Within a fortnight, she died. The chapel would also witness tragic events of Henry's 5th marriage to young Catherine Howard. In 1540, Henry would marry her, and here his ministers would whisper her infidelities in his ear. Here, the king celebrated Mass in the royal pew, while Catherine screamed for mercy in the hallway outside as she was dragged off to execution. The draughty corridor outside the chapel is called the Haunted Gallery, owing to the frequent appearance of Catherine's ghost on its way to the tower. In 1546, a bloated Henry VIII left Hampton Court for the last time, accompanied by his 6th and final wife. He died the next year.
Alas, my love,
One of Henry's most curious legacies is the great astronomical clock adorning Hampton's inner court. This remarkable instrument told Henry the hour, the date, the phases of the moon, and the high and low tides at London Bridge. What it could not tell him was that all his marriages and all his murders would be in vain. Henry's only son, Edward VI, ascended the throne at the age of 9, but he fell ill, and at just 15, he died. For a century and a half after the death of Henry VIII, English monarchs did little more than redecorate Hampton Court. Then a Dutch prince and his English wife took the throne, and the palace would never be the same. William and Mary were delighted with the setting of Hampton Court, perhaps because the flat landscape reminded William of his beloved Netherlands. But the Tudor architecture reminded them only of Henry. Under the vision of their architect, Christopher Wren, the Tudor would give way to the monumental symmetry of Baroque. To symbolize William and Mary's positions as co-rulers, Wren set about building symmetrical wings for their state apartments in 1689. Both wings would overlook Hampton Court. Oil lamps lit the court at night, making ghouls of the garish heads leering down from the arches. Five years later, Wren's vision of this side of the palace and garden were complete, and Hampton Court presented a new Baroque facade to the east. Wren adorned Hampton Court's eastern face with William and Mary's coats of arms and intertwined initials. In its crowning relief, Hercules gets the upper hand over envy. Behind the facade, the Queen's Wing was designed to offer Mary a delightful view of the great tree-lined avenues radiating out from the canal known as the Long Water. But Mary would have no chance to savour the views Wren concocted for her. Smallpox took the Queen before the apartments were finished, and the Hammers at Hampton fell silent. Heartbroken and nearly broke, William had neither the will nor the money to finish the job. He would find both only when his favourite residence, Whitehall, burned to the ground. By 1701, the royal apartment's King's Staircase sang William's praises, thanks to the fashionable Italian artist Antonio Verrio. Some visitors were suitably impressed, others were not. The writer Horace Walpole remarked that Verrio had painted it as ill as if he had spoiled it on purpose. Yet William of Orange was pleased, perhaps because Verrio depicted the king as Alexander the Great, cloaked in orange. For himself, the bald Verrio reserved the whimsical role of Pan. William would pine for his wife and homeland until 1702, when his only remaining source of joy proved his downfall. While William was hunting deer in the palace park, his horse tripped on a molehill and threw him. When he died of his injuries 2 weeks later, his enemies thanked the little gentleman in black velvet. Soon Hampton Court would cease to be a royal residence. Its rooms would be given as grace and favour apartments to retired servants of the crown. Only 2 more rulers would live here, George I and George II. George III had no love for the place and seldom even visited. Tradition has it he witnessed his grandfather's famous rages here and got his ears boxed. George II was known to take off his wig in fits of anger and kick it around. As king, George III would get his ears boxed again by the American colonies. In 1838, Queen Victoria opened the palace to the public. Each year since, thousands of children have made a beeline for its famous maze, where the goal since the 1690s has been to find the centre and get out again. Today, Hampton Court Palace presents 2 very different faces to the world. Visitors arriving from the West are greeted by the hodgepodge charm of Henry VIII's Red Tudor Palace. In its venerable backyard, they encounter the imposing symmetry of Christopher Wren's Baroque vision. Wending their way from one end to the other, they sample the tastes of 400 years of English monarchs. All because a butcher's son built a palace fit for a king.